Hi, everybody, and welcome to Celiac Advocacy, how to get involved in making a difference. This is the end of May, our Celiac Disease Awareness Month, and our program wanted to round out the month by giving you some ways that we can advocate for celiac awareness the entire year. So you'll see on the very opening slide here, there is information on how to contact both myself, Joyanna McMahon, Community Education Specialist for the Celiac Disease Program, as well as Vanessa Weisborough, our Director of the Celiac Disease Program, Director of Education and Community Programs. So let's get started. So our agenda for today is going through some current celiac facts and stats about celiac disease and where we are at this point in celiac awareness and diagnosis rates and research, everything about all of that kind of stuff. We have our research year in review, some big advancements that have occurred in celiac disease research in the last year or so. We also have ways to get involved in research studies so we can continue some more of these advancements and get closer to hopefully finding a cure. We also have current legislation that is going on and legislation that's being lobbied. As we know, there are still many things that we need to help us get closer to finding a cure and also just to make life better on a celiac disease diet. And also ways to get involved in some of that legislation advocacy. And then we also have some current celiac disease outreach, philanthropic efforts, and other ways to get involved. So those will be some of the things that we're going to be covering in this webcast today. So let's start with some current celiac disease facts and stats. So as we know, celiac disease is an autoimmune disease. It currently affects about 1 in 100 children, making it one of the most common conditions in children today. So that's pretty eye-opening as we see, and that's why we continue to advocate for efforts in schools. Celiac disease does qualify as a disability under the American with Disabilities Act, which means that it does qualify for a 504 plan. Many people also are not aware of the fact that it does qualify you for food in the cafeteria. So under a 504 plan, if you have one in place, if it is a public school that is receiving federal funds, the school is obligated to provide gluten-free food and accommodations in the cafeteria. So if you have more questions about that, make sure to contact us and we can help you with getting a 504 plan established and advocating and working for some accommodations in the school buildings for you. At this point, only about 35% of newly diagnosed patients had chronic diarrhea. So this dispels that myth that diarrhea must be present to diagnose celiac disease. And along with diarrhea, just in general, that myth that gastrointestinal distress in any capacity has to be present for celiac disease to be a diagnosis. Many people, again, are not aware of this, but there are currently over 300 symptoms that have been connected to celiac disease. So there's a lot more than meets the eye to the tummy troubles that many doctors think have to be present for celiac disease to be considered. The number of people with celiac disease in the US would fill 4,400 Boeing 747 airplanes. I mean, think about that. So we know those airplanes are huge. And then to need 4,400 of those airplanes to fit all of the people currently diagnosed with celiac disease in the US is pretty mind-boggling. So this is a good thing in the fact that as more people are getting diagnosed, that means that there is more knowledge and awareness to get people hopefully to a diagnosis. So these are all steps in the right direction. So people with a first-degree relative with celiac disease have a 1 in 10 chance developing celiac disease themselves. So that's pretty interesting. And the fact that in the previous statistic, it was 1 in 100 for the children, which again, basically goes along with 1 in 100 in just people in general. But then as you see, that genetic connection is really, really present. So a first degree relatives does increase your odds dramatically of unfortunately getting celiac disease yourself. So we really, really advocate for, once a first degree relative in your family gets diagnosed, that the entire family gets tested to make sure that everyone is getting the treatment they need if they do have celiac disease themselves. So that would be, parents, siblings, children, anyone that has that first degree connection needs to be tested for celiac disease themselves once someone gets diagnosed. Approximately 20% of people with celiac disease are asymptomatic. So again, that goes back to that original myth that tummy troubles need to be present. So in addition to those 300 symptoms that are connected with celiac disease, 20% of people present no symptoms whatsoever, which is what makes it so difficult for celiac disease to sometimes be diagnosed. I even have my family as well. So I have celiac disease, and I continue to tell my family on a regular basis that they need to get tested. And unfortunately, they're very resistant to that. But they continue to say that they don't have any symptoms. So these statistics are hopefully what can help them finally, change their minds and get on the ball. And also just for you to advocate to your own families. 20% of people are asymptomatic, so you don't need symptoms to get tested and possibly show that you have a diagnosis yourself. So continue to keep that in mind. Approximately 49% of children who have celiac disease also suffer from anxiety, including separation and social anxiety, pessimism, and excessive worrying. So this is a very interesting fact, and that's part of why, as you know, we in the celiac disease program have our multidisciplinary clinic that includes our psychology services. And that kind of goes into that whole, chicken egg scenario as to what comes first when it comes along with the statistic. But there definitely is a large mental health connection. And that comes along also with some of those, the ADHD connections and all of those type of things, the brain fog. But yeah, depression's a large part of it. And part of that, I think, also just comes from that idea that subconsciously for so long, food was making you ill. So you do become a bit anxious about the idea of eating. And even when then you are on the gluten-free diet, it does take time to retrain yourself to that idea that eating is not going to make you ill. So that is a big part of what our services and some of our treatment does provide, is kind of getting you along with some of those strategies. And there is also that grieving process for the individual diagnosed as well as the family, that life is not unfortunately going to be, normal in air quotes as it was before. Is going to be a large part of, your future lifestyle, and having to worry or think about making sure there is gluten-free food present. Recipes and family traditions will have to change. So all of that does definitely go into a large part of some of these mental health issues that you have to kind of, go through that grieving process, possibly go through some of that depression, and go through also some of that just in general anxiety. So these are all things to kind of to keep in mind, that once a diagnosis does occur, there are additional parts that you should be considering and making sure you're getting treatment for, as opposed to just jumping onto the gluten-free lifestyle and the food part of it. So because celiac disease interferes with mineral absorption, patients can suffer from deficiencies of iron, fiber, zinc, calcium, folate, magnesium, riboflavin, vitamin D, all of these additional minerals and vitamins. You have to think of the fact that for a long period of time, your intestines and just in general your body was not absorbing all of the major nutrients and everything that it needs. So people are in severe malnutrition after they get diagnosed, and this occurs with affecting a lot of parts of your body. There's a a lot of dental connections and people showing they have a lot of cavities, or even some people have talked about having different tooth malformations as they, depending upon how long and when in their age period they were not being diagnosed or not being treated yet. So a lot of people then, a lot of those children especially, when they have those later molars that come in, some of them are not forming correctly because they were malnourished for so long as that tooth was beginning to be formed. So it's, again, part of why in the multidisciplinary clinic we have that full nutrition and dietitian workup, because we do also want to take a look at where iron deficiencies might be, what other vitamin deficiencies might be present, to make sure that you are getting those additional things brought into the diet, as well as just following a gluten-free diet in the beginning. Patients with celiac disease suffer from headaches and migraines at a rate far higher than the general population. Again, this is why we have the neurology component of the clinic. We actually even also have a research study going on to look at some of the neurological symptoms that are connected to celiac disease. So this is definitely a large part, again, and we don't know what necessarily causes these neurological connections, but it is definitely something that's been very well documented at this point. Going back to the previous statement about some of the depression issues, teens who have celiac disease are more likely to suffer from depression, disruptive behavior, and different oppositional defiance disorder. In addition to some of that connection of the grieving process and all of the other, lifestyle disruptions, there are also some studies that have shown that malnutrition could be causing some of these other issues in the mental health quarter, for why some of these behaviors could be explained. So what this means, it's a lot that I just threw at you. One, celiac disease is not nearly as rare as once thought. And two, more people are getting diagnosed each year with this. As I said, it's not as rare anymore. So every year, celiac disease has increased 9.8% each year over the past 60 years worldwide. That is fantastic news. As I said, as more awareness is becoming more widespread, as more knowledge is being understood, as physicians are beginning to make those connections that it isn't always digestive, that there are those 300 other associated symptoms, more doctors are beginning to test. Also, as that genetic link is becoming more understood and more first-degree relatives are going in and getting tested when someone in their family is diagnosed, we are finally getting to a point where people are getting to that diagnosis quicker, and people are beginning to get the treatment that they need sooner, which is awesome. However, improvement is still needed, as we know. It is still estimated that 83% of Americans who have celiac disease are undiagnosed or misdiagnosed with other conditions. And unfortunately, the average length of time it takes for a symptomatic person to be diagnosed is still 6 years in the United States. So those statistics are still unfortunately very disheartening. We say that, we can fill those airplanes with all the people that are currently diagnosed, but this goes to show that there are still many, many more out there. And we still do need to continue getting that awareness out there, getting rid of that misconception that it's the tummy troubles that are causing it, and also just to get doctors to connect those dots sooner, that when someone goes in presenting with symptoms, to test immediately as opposed to waiting that 6 years for them to kind of finally get to that autoimmune connection. So these are still things that why these advocacy efforts are very much still needed to get us hopefully to that point where diagnosis occurs much quicker. So this is why research is important. So we have some really interesting studies here that I want to share with you. The first one we're going to start with that is going on actually right now is, does it matter when we expose at-risk infants to gluten? So this one it was done by the University of Chicago Celiac Disease Center, which, as we know, is huge in the celiac disease world. So There's been a lot of controversy for years over how to expose at-risk infants and what is going to cause some of these first-degree infants when a parent has celiac disease. What is going to cause some of these infants to develop celiac disease, whereas others do not? And for a very long time, it was thought that the precise timing of the introduction of gluten made a difference, or perhaps even whether a child was nursed versus formula fed, if that made a difference. However, a lot of research has disproved those theories. So now what? So the belief is now that it is the amount of gluten fed to at-risk infants that matters. So the University of Chicago Celiac Disease Center did this study, and through all of this, they realized that there was a big difference as to what children develop celiac disease versus others, depending upon how much gluten was fed to them in those early years. So they recommend now that these children should eat less than 5 grams of gluten-containing food per day, beginning when solid food is first introduced to a baby at that 4 to 6 month mark. And this should continue for the first 2 years of life. So, and to get an idea as to what that 5 grams looks like, it should be less than an ounce of pasta or 1 slice of bread. So as you can see, that's very minimal amount. And that goes against what a lot of people have thought when you think of those early baby diets normally. So if you are a first-degree relative that has celiac disease, mother, father, sibling, and a baby is born to the family, these are the new recommended guidelines for introducing gluten to that baby's diet, and hopefully potentially limiting if that child's going to be developing celiac disease or not. So that's what's out there right now when it comes to the research market on celiac disease development. So another big study. So we're now getting into at-home testing. And if it is as cohesive or accurate as the blood tests that are done in doctors' offices. So, and this is important for multiple reasons. One, these at-home testing kits can be used to help diagnose celiac disease early on. Now, granted, you still should go through the full endoscopy, everything else, but at least could help give you that idea up front if it is something even to pursue. And the other important way this can be used is to then see if you're following a gluten-free diet and how adherent or if there's any exposure that's occurring. So, or if you need to be more vigilant. So, first of it is also the kits are then deciding how many antibodies really need to be tested in these blood tests to show accuracy. So the I'm Aware at-home testing kits can look to see how well the gluten-free diet is working by tracking. There's 4 antibodies that are being tested. So the study that was done compared this new kit to the conventional single antibody tests that are done in doctors' offices. And in their analysis, they found that the probability of confirming celiac disease or determining exposure was 100% accurate. So that's pretty awesome. So we still recommend you going in for that, 3-month mark, 6-month mark, and the 1-year mark. But this is really good to know that if you're concerned about you being exposed, or if you're being vigilant enough, you can also at least monitor yourself with these at-home tests and see where your blood work is showing in your levels, and seeing if you can at least know that you have 100% accuracy rate in demonstrating whether your blood is showing exposure or not, and also going into the doctor's office as well. So look at that future technology coming in. Along with blood work, we also have at-home urine and stool tests. Come on, this is really exciting stuff here. So this goes to show how much gluten a person who feels they are being extremely vigilant on a gluten-free diet still might be actually consuming. So this is an interesting study because it goes to show, unfortunately, people who feel they are being extremely vigilant and adherent to the gluten-free diet might still actually be getting exposed more than they believe. So 60% of patients trying to follow a strict gluten-free diet showed evidence of still being exposed to gluten. That's a pretty high amount, unfortunately. So this test went through. There is and also the amount of gluten that they were actually having when they thought they were being strict was also still pretty high. The amount of gluten varied from 0.23 milligrams to more than 40 milligrams with each exposure. So participants in the study provided portions of all the food they ate over 10 days, and they also provided stool and urine samples. So the preliminary results confirmed that a strictly gluten-free diet is definitely more difficult to achieve, even by highly motivated patients and people that are considered very educated with the celiac disease diet. And the other interesting part was that the stool test was found to be significantly more sensitive in detecting smaller amounts of gluten than even a urine test. So more research is still done, needing to clarify the role of urine and stool samples in the management of patients. But whether you want to start, obviously, following through, testing your stool and urine on a regular basis is up to you. But I think the big important takeaway from this study is that we really are still exposed on a very regular basis, whether we realize it or not. It really is difficult to just navigate real life and the world with, unfortunately, still not being exposed to gluten. So it's just something to be mindful of. So getting closer to a celiac vaccine, that is always the huge exciting news in the gluten-free world. So we're getting closer. The vaccine is being studied to treat celiac disease. It has received fast track designation from the US Food and Drug Administration. The NextVax2 is what it's called. It's a therapeutic vaccine. It's now in the phase 2 study and is currently being recruiting 150 patients in the US for participation in the clinical trial. It is being developed at this point to be used in addition to a gluten-free diet. So unfortunately, we're still not at the point where it would take the place of that, but it at least would provide protection from that inadvertent gluten exposure. So, for example, when you're eating out and are concerned about cross-contact, or if a mistake is being made in a restaurant. So it would kind of almost be that buffer, kind of almost like the lactose pill for people who are lactose-free, where you could take it and then, eat and kind of hopefully preventatively alleviate symptoms. They are looking for adult patients to participate in the clinical trial. So if you are interested, you can click on this link here that I provided to get involved in helping that fast track efforts and being one of those 150 patients in that clinical trial for the next phase. So continuing on with that, other current research opportunities. So as I said, you can see the importance of all of these research efforts in making advancements for future lifestyle enhancements. A big one going into more of that baby and who's going to develop celiac disease versus others. There's a current study that's going on at Mass General in Boston. It's going to be following infants from birth through childhood. They are currently recruiting infants in the womb, so people who are still pregnant or aged up to 6 months, so a newborn baby, who have a first-degree relative. So again, looking for that parent or sibling in the family that has a new baby. If you have celiac disease and you're having a new baby, try getting in touch with Mass General and seeing if you could get involved in this study and see if your baby, what causes your baby versus others to potentially develop celiac disease or not. So if you have questions about this study, please email the email address that I provided to enroll or inquire about enrollment. And the good news is you do not have to live in Boston to participate in this study. You can participate through your pediatrician, your local pediatrician, or participating centers in the area. They will send all of the related materials necessary. I believe they're tracking it through, urine and stool samples, and all of that can be done here in your local doctor's office and sent to them to participate. So you can live anywhere in the country and participate in this study. We at the Celiac Disease Program have a number of research opportunities that we're looking for patients and families to participate. As I said, we have some neurological studies going on, the connections between celiac disease and neurological symptoms. We also have a psychological study going on, looking at the prevalence of some of those mental health issues that I discussed earlier and the connection to celiac disease. We also are helping with those urine and stool sample tests and evaluating these new devices. So if you're interested in tracking your adherence or exposure levels, you can definitely help us test some of these devices. We also are developing tools to measure knowledge and risk of gluten exposure. Some of you are already doing that, whether you realize it or not, when you come into the clinic and are filling out those knowledge assessment surveys in our pre-clinic surveys. So thank you very much for helping us with those research efforts. And we also have a number of other issues, study opportunities as well. For instance, hopefully you'll see it in the current newsletter that's coming out. We're in the process of doing a gluten contamination study in schools, and we're looking for 30 willing participants to hopefully come in and help us. The catch is we need participants who do not have celiac disease. So if you have a sibling or a family friend who does not have celiac disease and is between the ages of 4 and 18, we'd love to have you help us. We are measuring regular school supplies, things that you are exposed to on a regular basis that might potentially have gluten or not, and looking to see how much is actually passed in cross-contamination with those efforts. So for instance, if you are actually playing with Play-Doh and it rubs on that table, how much of the traces are actually left behind? These are the type of questions that we are looking to get answered, and we need willing students to help us get those answers. And these results are going to help us make recommendations for 504 plan accommodations and just give us that general knowledge to know just how much of gluten is really in these efforts that we're always recommending, if it's necessary or not to be steering clear of these things. So again, these are really great answers that we could hopefully come along with to change our lifestyle or know what we actually really do need to live the best gluten-free lifestyles that we can. So if you're interested in participating in any of these studies, you can contact the research coordinators at neuroceliac@childrensnational.org, or you can also always reach out to Vanessa Weisborough or myself, Joanna McMahon, at the email addresses I also provided. Now getting into the legislation efforts. So legislation that is currently being lobbied is for gluten and medications. As we know, this is a huge bane of our existence in the celiac disease world. Finding the medications that are gluten-free. Pharmacies are not able to provide this information, unfortunately, because those those pill capsules and the starch that's used to hold it all together changes on a regular basis. So this current Disclosure Act from 2019, the Gluten and Medicine Disclosure Act, was introduced to the House of Representatives in April. The bill intends to make it easier to identify gluten prescriptions by requiring drug manufacturers to label medications with the list of ingredients and their source and whether gluten is present. This would make a huge difference for everybody. If this is passed by the House, the bill would move forward for review by the Senate. You could read the full text of this bill here on the link that I provided. And you can also help in some of the future slides I'm going to show you in help in some of these lobbying efforts and advocate for this bill getting passed as well. We can also talk more about the school guidelines that I discussed. That gluten and contamination study that I mentioned, those results are going to help with these school guidelines that we are lobbying for. The Celiac School Action Guidelines for Education, it's called the SAGE initiative. As the number of students with celiac disease continues to grow, there's an increased need to educate school administrators and staff about how to care for them effectively. So this requires a development of clear, consistent, evidence-based recommendations. So the Celiac Disease Foundation and Children's National, our celiac disease program, have teamed up, as well as with NAFDGAM, and we are launching these Celiac School Action Guidelines for Education, the SAGE initiative, with 3 main objectives. We want to define the risk of gluten contamination in everyday school supplies. So, as I said, the results from that study that we're working on, this would help us with tangible evidence-based results know just what the risk of some gluten contamination is with some of these school supplies. We want to work together to develop national recommendations for schools and families based upon this data. So kind of like how there's now some of those recommendations for the peanut allergies in schools, we want to have some national guidelines for celiac disease and what should be consistent in accommodations in 504 plans. And we also want to make sure that we're providing appropriate training for the implementation of these recommendations. There's too much discrepancy in the knowledge in schools as to what actually is necessary to provide safe school classrooms and cafeterias for celiac students. We want to make sure that there's training protocols in place in schools so they understand what is necessary. And we're looking on presenting some of our pilot study data for these results. And we're reviewing these with the SAGE participants, and we're hoping to have some of these recommendations ready by 2020. So as well as some education accredited training videos to be made available to schools and their families. So even if people don't necessarily live nearby, we can hopefully reach schools throughout the country with some of these guidelines and training videos, and really hopefully make this a nationwide approach to celiac disease accommodations in the school. There's a lot of information that's still not getting out there about those 504 plans and the qualifications for them, and about providing gluten-free food in the schools. And this is a huge issue that we're hoping to get addressed very soon. So again, if you're interested in getting involved, please reach out and help us with this project. Other ways to get involved in legislation advocacy. So as I said, so if you go into the Celiac Disease Foundation, they have a huge list of some current public policy priorities. And you can then also sign up on their webpage for some of these things. So the one would be information on that gluten and medications. You can get involved with that statement and that lobbying efforts at that link at the bottom there. They also have other public policy issues, trying to get federal research grants for research, advanced treatments, finding a cure. Money is always necessary for that, and unfortunately there's never enough of it. So you can take action in trying to get more awareness and driving some more force for some of those research grants to be made available. We also are demanding more patient protections. Celiac Disease Foundation is looking for any new health plan that emerges from Congress to be given with protection for patients with chronic disease. That unfortunately is always an issue that comes out when someone has an autoimmune disease or any kind of chronic illness, making sure they're protected on health plans, that they are not dropped for having a chronic illness. Another big thing is sharing your story with Congress, telling Congress why celiac disease needs more funding and needs more awareness and efforts to be made for it. Life with celiac disease, as we know, is challenging. It's really difficult, unfortunately, though, for people who don't live with it day to day or have any direct firsthand knowledge of it to really understand what goes into living a gluten-free lifestyle and living with celiac disease. You can help by sharing what you lived through and what you wish Congress would know about the seriousness of celiac disease and why they should be funding research for a cure and why they need to be also helping with some of these school-wide guidelines and just general general efforts to be making life easier. So on April 9th, the Celiac Disease Foundation CEO, Marilyn Geller, testified before the House Committee. She incorporated more than 750 patient stories received from the celiac community. You can read the full testimony at the link I provided. But again, you can continue to help with that by sharing your story as well. You'll see that you can share the link on the Celiac Disease page, the Celiac Disease Foundation page. Another way you could help is by getting involved in the community. So these are some of those philanthropic efforts now that I mentioned earlier. As celiac disease diagnosis rates continue to climb, we also know that unfortunately there are poverty rates that are continuing to climb in the country. Imagine being homeless and not knowing when you're going to eat again. And now imagine having celiac disease as well. Do you eat the food provided when you want to just get any food imaginable, knowing that it's going to make you sick or starve? This unfortunately is a lot of what's being faced out there right now. When you think of food pantries and soup kitchens and the food that they are providing, which is amazing that they're at least doing that, a lot of it is not gluten-free friendly, unfortunately. You think of how expensive gluten-free foods are on anyone's budget when you're on a gluten-free diet. It's not usually an expense that these pantries can provide. So unfortunately, we're having a lot of patients who are avoiding or making a difficult choice. There luckily are some safe food pantries alleviating this issue. Unfortunately, they're few and far between. But the Safe Food Pantry on this link that I'm providing here is an entirely gluten-free pantry providing allergy-friendly food. So we can at least help them with their efforts, and also other food pantries that are beginning to sprout up across the country that are realizing this is an issue. So hopefully this could be something that continues to get addressed as more people are made aware of the issue. So looking for any more information or knowledge, we always want to share our celiac disease and gluten-free digital resource and app. You can download it on the Android or iOS or app-friendly stores. It provides our safe and unsafe ingredient lists, our shopping tips, our videos and recipes, links to our podcasts and webcasts, and all of our gluten-free buddy and teen events. So please, if you haven't downloaded it already, make sure you do and share it with any friends that you know that are also needing these wonderful resources. The more we can spread, the more we can learn. So thank you very much for joining me today. Again, if you have any questions or want to get involved in our research opportunities, please reach out to Vanessa or myself at the email addresses provided. And we hope to see you all soon in the clinic and at some of our events. Thank you.